What's up guys, my name is Ace, and earlier this week I was invited out to Sledgehammer Games to capture some Season 1 content for Modern Warfare 3, and at the studio, they actually talked about matchmaking for the first time ever, and they also released a public statement online. So today, I just wanted to share this statement and then talk about all of my thoughts on this situation currently. And let's just dive right into it with the official statement that they released to the public. This is coming directly from the Call of Duty team. They say, "We know there's a lot of interest in the matchmaking experience, especially around how skill contributes to how lobbies and matches are put together. Nothing is more important to us than the experience players have with the game, and matchmaking is a big part of that. We've been working on our matchmaking system for well over 10 years, and we continue to spend a ton of time and energy on improving the matchmaking process. This involves people working at our Call of Duty studios, our back-end services team at Demonware, and other groups like our Player Insights team. It's a large effort that we've worked on for many years, and our approach combines latency, search time, and skill, along with many other factors, to try to find the best match experience for you. Talking about this topic in detail can be hard, and we haven't spent the time to pull together all of our work to share with you our insights and improvements over the many years. We are looking forward to doing that in the coming weeks after Season 1 launches, and we'll also make it a part of our ongoing discussions with the community." So there we go. I believe that is the first time Call of Duty has officially talked about matchmaking. Like in the past, there have been some previous developers that maybe talk about it a little bit and have mentioned it. But as far as I remember, these statements were always just one individual developer sharing a little tidbit of information. And it was never an official statement from the Call of Duty team themselves. So this is pretty big news. Even though this particular statement doesn't really reveal a whole lot, it's at least opening the door, and it's the first step in the right direction, I would say. And I am very curious to see what they say about this over time in the coming weeks after Season 1 launches, as they mentioned. Now, I suspect we're not going to get the amount of transparency that we're hoping for. And also, I hope you don't get your hopes up too high. I don't think this is the beginning of them completely eliminating skill-based matchmaking from Call of Duty. That's not going to be happening anytime in the near future. But in saying that, this has been one of the top complaints since Modern Warfare 2019 launched. So for about 4 years now, one of the biggest complaints in the Call of Duty community has been completely ignored. It's been nothing but dead silence on this topic from the developers until this statement. So I do think this is a fairly big deal, but I also want to make sure I'm not overhyping this for you guys. This is in no way an indication that they are removing or significantly toning down the skill-based or engagement-optimized matchmaking system that they're using. Now, I have been noticing recently when this topic comes up, I've been seeing a lot of people that I think recently came into the Call of Duty franchise and they don't quite understand the issue with the matchmaking system that Call of Duty is using. They see the term skill-based matchmaking and they think, what's wrong with playing with people of a similar skill level? Or anybody that wants this toned down just wants to pub stomp on noobs all day. So there are some misconceptions here, and I do want to clear this up by just sharing a list of the top issues that arise from the current implementation of matchmaking that Call of Duty is using, and has been using since Modern Warfare 2019. For those of you guys that have been around for a while, you already know all of these points, and I will leave timestamps down below, so feel free to just skip ahead if you want to skip this section. Because after this, I do want to talk about why I think they're making this statement at this point, as well as what I hope to realistically see going forward. So let's get into a brief recap of the primary points against the current state of matchmaking in Call of Duty. I'm going to blast through these pretty quickly. I could talk about this stuff for hours, but in regular public matches, non-ranked play, there is no visible skill rank, so you can't see where you stand and you can't track your improvement over time. What's the point of getting better if you don't see any improvement to your gameplay performance and you don't see any improvement to your ranking? Number 2, the matchmaking system that they use is not a true long-term skill-based matchmaking system. It's very heavily dependent on just your recent performance. So the past several matches that you've played, that's really what's going to determine what kind of match you're going to be getting into. And as a result, for many people at least, they see very wild swings from game to game. One game, they absolutely stomp on some people because they get put into a lobby that's too easy for their actual skill level. But then, since they did so well there, that immediately bumps them up the next game into a lobby that they just can't compete with, and they get absolutely stomped on. And that's obviously not a very fun experience, especially when it's not organic, and your experience is being actively manipulated by this system in the background, where the system's basically saying oh, you've been playing too good for a while, it's time for you to get humbled a little bit and knocked down a few notches. And then after you get knocked down a few notches, then the system's like, okay, you've been punished enough, let's give you some easy lobbies again. And when the system is controlling that, and you become aware of that, it's really frustrating to see, because then you can start to anticipate what's going to happen in your next game. If you play super well one game, you know what's coming for you that next game. You know you're not not going to have a good time the next game. And that's completely counterintuitive. You should be happy that you just performed really well and had a great game. But once you're aware of this system, you start to realize just how much it can manipulate your experience and how you're not really in control of your destiny. The game is very often deciding whether or not you're going to have a good game or a bad game based on your recent performance. So in that sense, it's not even really a true skill-based matchmaking system where it's trying to determine your overall skill level and then match you based on that. It involves wild and heavily manipulated swings from game to game. Number 3 on my list here, Call of Duty public matches are simply not fine-tuned competitive experiences. When you look toward the actual competitive play, like ranked play and what the pro players are playing with, they have to get rid of like half of the game and limit themselves to certain maps and certain modes just to have an actual fully competitive experience. COD pubs are more like a sandbox where everybody's working toward their own individualistic challenges. Most people are camo grinding or working on leveling up a terrible gun or whatever they might be doing. And that style of play is not really heavily suited to matching people heavily based on their skill or even recent performance. Now, ranked play, on the other hand, that is a more finely tuned competitive experience, and therefore, of course, that's where the skill-based matchmaking should be, not so heavily in regular public matches. As for the next thing on my list, variety. Variety is significantly reduced, especially if you become a higher skilled player and tend to play in the higher skilled lobbies on a consistent basis. Good luck using anything but the meta and still having an enjoyable experience. In those types of lobbies, there is often no room for error. You have to be using the best guns, the best attachments, and playing in the most competitive way possible just to keep your head above the water. And again, we're talking public matches where you can't even see where you stand. You're effectively playing a different game compared to the other lobbies that have tons of room for error, and therefore they can use a wide variety of things, and it doesn't really matter nearly as much. As for the next one, and this is quite a big one, with all the skill-based matchmaking studies I've done in the past, I've done some very in-depth studies back when they allowed us to view player stats using the API. I found evidence that ping is not necessarily king anymore. In that statement, they mentioned latency first. I don't really believe that. I don't think latency is number one. Or at the very least, I think they're willing to be pretty flexible with your latency in order to get you into a better skill match lobby. With that testing I did in the past, I tested with 2 different accounts on the exact same system, all the same network settings, wasn't filtering with my NetDuma or anything like that. I was just letting the matchmaking system do whatever it wanted with me. I found evidence in multiple years that on average, my main account where I play very well with it saw a noticeably higher latency on average than my bot account, which I just use for testing purposes. So there's evidence that your connection experience will suffer as you become better at the game, at least on average. I do want to be clear that it's not like I never got a good connection on my main account. It's just on average, my connection was noticeably worse. So it appears the better you get, the worse your connection may get on average. And then finally, for this quick recap list, playing with mixed skilled friends has become so much worse than it was before Modern Warfare 2019. If you're a really good player and you want to play with a friend who's not so good at Call of Duty, with the way the matchmaking system works currently, when that player plays on their own, they're going to have a very, very different experience. It's almost like they're playing a different game compared to when they play with you. And this is something tons of people have experienced. Many friend groups no longer play together because they just don't have a good experience playing together, because it's no longer that random system that only had very loose skill-based matchmaking, where most of the time, most players would be average, and then there'll be some low-skill players, some higher-skill players, and there's just like a little bit of everything for everyone in those lobbies. That doesn't really happen anymore, at least not nearly as often as it used to, and that obviously sucks, especially because, again, we're playing public matches where we don't even have a rank. We're not playing ranked play with different skill lobbies, we're just playing pubs. So there we go. That does wrap it up for the primary points against the current implementation of skill-based matchmaking or engagement-optimized matchmaking, performance-based matchmaking, whatever you want to call it. Now let's move on to the big question that I have, and that is, why did they finally decide to address this now? After many years of complete silence on the issue, why are they talking about it now? I do want to be clear, this is of course speculation. This is just what I think about the issue. Obviously, we don't have a solid answer to this at this point. But the first thing I've seen pop up a fair amount in the community is perhaps this is Microsoft's doing, because Microsoft now finally owns Activision. Maybe this is something coming from the top down where they want to change how they're handling things. While I think that's possible, I personally have my doubts. I don't think Microsoft is really getting too hands-on with things like that. I think they're primarily just going to be leveraging Call of Duty in order to promote Game Pass and just to improve their overall market share in the gaming industry. But it's also not completely out of the question that maybe Microsoft stepped in a little bit. Another potential reason for this is Sledgehammer themselves. Sledgehammer's big thing, their claim to fame with the Call of Duty franchise at the moment, is their willingness to listen to the community and make changes based on community feedback. I would say out of the 3 main Call of Duty studios, they are absolutely the best in this area. That's kind of their thing. So maybe this was Sledgehammer pushing really hard to be able to make a statement about this, and I think that's potentially plausible as well. However, I think it's more a case, and I'm hoping this is the case at least, that we're starting to reach that tipping point where the long-term burnout that's caused by this matchmaking system may be starting to outpace the short-term positive impacts. While this always has been a very hot topic in the community and one of the biggest complaints, it seems like this year I'm seeing even more complaints than usual. I'm also seeing more and more comments of people that are finally saying, like, I'm done with this. I stuck around for a while. I can't handle it anymore. I'm burnt out on Call of Duty. It hasn't really been fun for me in years, but I stuck around with the hopes that it would get better, and it just hasn't gotten better, so I'm done with it. And many people are pointing specifically to the matchmaking system as to why they are not buying the current Call of Duty game, or they started playing it and they can't play it anymore. They just don't want to deal with this system anymore, and they moved on to other games. This is something that I suspected would happen over time. I knew it would take years and years before this would happen, but when they first implemented the system, it was clear, short term, this was great. It was bringing in a ton of new players that hadn't really played Call of Duty or didn't play much Call of Duty because they were being protected more than ever before by this system. But in doing so, it was alienating and pushing away more of the long-term, super dedicated fans that also tend to be quite good at the game. And the thing with those fans is they're addicted to Call of Duty. They have been addicted for many years, so they're still going to stick with it and suffer through the system for years and years before really reaching that burnout point. And based on the reception that I've seen, many people seem to have reached that breaking point. So that's my best guess as to why now, like why did they bring this up now? If things are going really well with that system, I think they would continue to be completely silent with it. But I think it's gotten to the point where they can no longer ignore it because perhaps it's not working quite as well as it used to in the past. At least that's my speculation, as well as my hope, to be honest, because that means that change will have to be coming as well. And that's where we're going to talk about the last section. Will we see change from this? In that official statement they revealed, they just mentioned that they were going to be more transparent and talk about it throughout Season 1. However, at the studio when they talked about it, while I don't remember them specifically saying this, I did get the impression that they were going to be testing some adjustments to the system to see how things go. Kind of like what they're doing with disbanding lobbies, which is another big thing that really ties into this topic, because this is something that really exacerbates the matchmaking issue. When the lobby auto-disbands after every game and forces you to search for a game after every single game that you complete, that allows that system to have those wild swings from match to match. Whereas if you stayed in the same lobby like we used to back in the day, even with the skill-based matchmaking system being present, at least when you get into those games with a good connection and a good group of people, even if it's a fairly competitive match, if you at least have a good connection in that match and an enjoyable experience, you can stick with that match. And it's not going to suddenly swing from one game to the next, because it can't if everybody's staying in the lobby. And that's not only talking about the player's skill level in the lobby, that's also talking about the connection experience. When you have the lobbies that stick together, at least from what I remember, you connect to the exact same data center every single game as long as you stay in that lobby. So realistically, I do think it's possible we'll see some minor adjustments to the system. Again, at the very least, if the data shows that the non-disbanding lobbies are working well, it would be amazing if we could just get lobbies that stick together. But even on top of that, perhaps we will see some loosening to the matchmaking system a little bit. But I'm also not going to hold my breath on this. I'm just curious to see what they end up talking about throughout Season 1. And it's just one of those time will tell situations, but at least the door is open on this topic now. And they are planning on talking even more about their matchmaking systems. Now, of course, I am very curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. What do you guys think about this statement and just the general fact that they've finally acknowledged the matchmaking in Call of Duty after many years of silence? Do you think this could potentially result in some adjustments to the matchmaking system over time? Or do you think things are going to be pretty much the same going forward and they're just going to explain a little bit as to why they do what they do? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.